Hi everyone, my name is Lee, and I specialize in environmental studies and permitting. The Port of New Orleans asked me to give you a short overview of the environmental study process. It's a big topic, but I'm going to do my best to cover it. Let's start the clock. We all know big projects affect people and environments around them. And if we're not informed about the potential effects, we can't address them. So it's important to look at them. Fortunately, there's a federal law called the National Environmental Policy Act, otherwise known as NEPA. It requires federal agencies to study the potential environmental impacts of a project before they allow those actions to move forward. For the Louisiana International Terminal in St. Bernard Parish, that agency is the Army Corps of Engineers, and the study has to be done before they decide whether or not to issue permits for construction. As you'd expect, this environmental review analyzes impacts to nature, but it goes beyond that to also study the human environment as well. So what that means is, in addition to looking at wetlands, air quality, wildlife, and the like, the study's also going to look at the human environment, like the economy, impacts to traffic, community assets, and cultural resources. The impact studies won't just stop at the port's property line either. They're going to look at the impacts to neighbors in Violet and other surrounding communities, the larger parish, and even statewide. There are a few different players involved in carrying all of that out. The Army Corps is responsible for overseeing the development of the study. They're essentially the boss in this process. The Corps also is going to select an outside, unbiased contractor from a list of potential contractors that the port will provide to conduct the research and write this environmental study report. This keeps the impact study results independent from the Port of New Orleans. Port NOLA's main role in this whole study process is to provide data that the Army Corps and contractor need to conduct their study. For instance, they'll provide information regarding their proposed terminal layout. The public has a major role too. The NEPA process levels the playing field by asking members of the entire community to provide input at each step of the environmental review process. So you don't have to know the colonel over at the Army Corps of Engineers to have your voice heard. You may be wondering how long a process like this can take. We expect that this process is going to take probably about 2 to 3 years, and Port NOLA is at the very beginning of that process now. The first big step for public input will take place when the Army Corps issues a notice asking the public to provide input on what sorts of impacts should be studied. This step is officially called scoping. During scoping, the public will have different ways to tell the Army Corps what kinds of impacts are on your mind. Federal agencies usually accept input by mail, email, through websites, and even in face-to-face meetings. It's important to know that this NEPA process doesn't just produce a report. It'll also help the port design a better terminal. The port will be able to see what improvements should be made to make the project better for the community. And the port can address negative impacts within the terminal property itself. And it's going to work with the Department of Transportation and Development, otherwise known as DOTD, the parish, local school districts, and other organizations to address impacts throughout the larger St. Bernard Parish area. Okay, it looks like our time is up, but this is a big important topic. So if you still have questions or you want to talk, visit the project website. That's at yourworkingriver.com, or come visit Port NOLA at the Community Connection Office in Violet. We really appreciate you taking the time to watch the video today, and the Port of New Orleans looks forward to your input on this important project throughout the environmental review process.